Today we're talking about children's right to good nutrition. I'm here today at a local church's food distribution space. They use this space once per month to anyone in the community who needs food. A significant chunk of the food comes from the USDA federal program, and it's run by many hours of work from dedicated volunteers each month. Community food pantries and food distribution sites like this one are important when it comes to supporting children's rights to good nutrition, but they're also an indicator of the scale and scope of what it takes to support children's rights to good nutrition. We sometimes think about hunger as a historical problem, like people lived a long time ago, had challenges getting food, and spent a lot of their time collecting food. But it's also a current day problem as well, so it's not just a historical problem. Many people around the globe currently experience hunger and food insecurity and lack access to a stable location to get their food from. Looking at the data, about 50% of preventable deaths in children are from malnutrition or related diseases of not having enough food. So malnutrition remains a huge portion of the cause of death and mortality in children. Globally, it's still a huge problem. About 1 in 3 children under 5 have either nutrition, which is not having malnutrition, not enough to eat, or not enough of the right things, or they're overweight. So a lot of countries face this kind of double whammy of having those without enough food or without the right kinds of enough food, or those who are getting too much of the wrong kinds of food. Malnutrition leads to 2 important problems. One is called stunting. This is impaired growth that happens when you have insufficient nutrition and it causes repeated infections and other kinds of challenges. The other is wasting. This is when you're too thin or too small for your height, often from rapid weight loss or failure to gain weight. And the number of children who are overweight has grown in all continents to almost 1 in 5 under age 5 in 2016. Hunger in the U.S. is also a huge problem. There are hungry people in the U.S. and Iowa City on campus. The 2025 Big Beautiful Bill passed by Congress made big cuts to food safety net, including a 20% cut to SNAP, and states many of them have also made cuts as well. This will add to hunger and food insecurity in Iowa and across the United States. Sometimes people think food banks like this one will pick up the difference when those cuts are made, or churches will pick up the difference. However, if you look at the data on how much food SNAP provides and how much food banks provide, SNAP provides about 9 times more meals than food banks, and there simply just isn't capacity for food banks to fill this huge gap as they're already overloaded. Obesity is also a big problem in the U.S., with around 20% of children being obese, and this can result in lifelong health problems such as diabetes, heart disease, and makes other conditions like asthma much worse. Now, in 2026, the global hunger crisis continues. The UN says over 260 million people globally face some kind of food insecurity, and catastrophic hunger is facing people in many countries, including Sudan, Democratic Republic of Congo, Nigeria, Afghanistan, Syria, Yemen, and Gaza. And some 35 million children around the world are acutely malnourished, and 10 million children have severe malnutrition. One of the major risks for food insecurity is becoming a refugee, and some 85 million people in 2025 were forced from their homes and became refugees, putting them at high risk for malnutrition and lack of access to food. This is a short clip from Al Jazeera that's going to show some of the information on the crisis on the Sudan hunger crisis.
An alarming warning, and it's not new. This is the world's worst humanitarian crisis. Almost 25 million people are facing acute hunger in Sudan, according to the World Food Programme. That's roughly the same as the entire population of Sri Lanka. It's the largest hunger crisis in recent history. Fueled by conflict, this is man-made.
We had to flee because of the fighting and ended up here in Tawila. We have nothing to eat. It's so hard on us. We need many things: shelter from the rain, protection from mosquitoes, food and water. My child here is suffering from malnutrition.
Famine has been declared in various regions of the country, and the United Nations is warning that it's spreading. The fighting is now into its 3rd year, a conflict and human suffering the world has become accustomed to. Despite warnings that it's getting worse by the day, warnings it seems the world has also become used to. Stephanie Decker, Al Jazeera.
Armed conflict remains a massive cause of food insecurity. UNICEF estimated that more than 50,000 children were killed or injured in Gaza from war and the food blockade that came along with the war. And although the food blockade is somewhat decreased and there's more humanitarian aid getting through now in 2026, children in Gaza still face tremendous hunger and food access problems. And as with all war, children have experienced a high proportion of the harm and death caused by the conflict between adults. Children don't care about the reason for the war, they just want to go to school, have a good meal, play with friends, yet much of the world looks on with indifference to their hunger and to their plight. In addition to war and conflict, extreme weather is making the access to food more difficult and is increasing the malnutrition crisis. Extreme weather with things like drought causing crop failure in countries like Zimbabwe, Zambia, and Malawi. Wildfires are also a growing problem as there's drought. Wildfires grow bigger and faster and more quickly, and that makes it more difficult to grow crops locally, thus relying on a global distribution network, which is also unreliable and often out of the cost ability of some people to pay for the cost of food on that global market. Cuts to the U.S. global food aid program has also been a challenge as the Trump administration reduced global food programs for some 2.3 million children in lower and middle income countries. And there's some estimates that this could lead to many hundreds of thousands of extra child deaths per year and an increase in malnutrition-related diseases around the globe. Now, we talked about conflict and war a bit, but famine is and other things are only cause about 10% of the deaths from hunger and malnutrition. And in fact, 90% of the deaths with hunger and food-related issues are from chronic, long-term lack of access to adequate food. So this long-term lack of access to food creates a high risk that any small disruption will be catastrophic, so any kind of small bump in your food system or food supply, and all of a sudden you're thrust into a malnutrition or hunger status. And also, long-term lack of access to food creates other health problems, limits growth, and limits the ability to engage in other activities such as school or learning and developing skills for a future career. All of that is difficult to do when you're just simply trying to find enough food to get through the day. So solving these chronic food problems requires addressing structural food issues, not just providing emergency food during a famine or a war. So one way people think about how to find strategies for addressing food is by looking at what's called the social ecological model. This is a model we'll talk about in a few different places in class, but it thinks about the context of the individual and how they operate within their relationships, their families, their close roommates or others that they live with, within a broader community, and then the societal factors that also are connected to those various levels as well. So some of the things you can think about when you think about the causes of hunger or food insecurity, at the society level, it'd be things like climate change, high prices for food, high food demand, refugee status, unsustainable food systems. The next level down, at the community level, you'll see things like low capacity to produce food locally, so any kind of bump in the global food system results in having no food because you don't have any locally. No food safety systems, poor educational opportunities, being a long distance from the food sources or food stores, and lack of prenatal and maternal care is also an important community factor. At the family level, being a part of a family in poverty, as you may expect, is a high risk factor for malnutrition and low access to food. A loss of a parent or other caregiver is something we often don't think about, but it's also a high risk for children not having access to enough food, which we saw a huge increase in that of during COVID, especially of children becoming orphaned when their parents passed away. At the individual level, risk factors include things like being a woman or a child, having a disease or having a disability also puts you at high risk for food insecurity. So as you think about those causes of those various levels, the strategies then make sense to align with those causes as well. So the society level, taking action to address climate change, preventing forced migration, universal education, especially free universal education, having food safety processes and policies, working to reduce prices on healthy foods, and finding funding for low-income families to afford more and better food. At the community level, things we can do is to provide clean water and sanitation systems, ensuring access to prenatal and maternal health care, preventing infectious diseases, preventing diarrheal diseases and other things through vaccination programs, encouraging local food production to reduce the effect of global food price changes, reducing the distance to food stores by ensuring everyone has access to food stores nearby them and can get to them easily, and considering things like SSB or sugar-sweetened beverage taxes to reduce obesity. So some things you can do locally. One of the things you can do is participate in what's called the Hawkeye Meal Share. So if you have unused guest meals at the dining halls on campus, you can donate them through the Hawkeye Meal Share program at dos.uiowa.edu/assistance/meal-share. And you can also request meal assistance through that same site as well. Other things you can do, you can volunteer with the UI Food Pantry, with the Johnson County Crisis Center Food Bank, the Coralville Community Food Pantry, the North Liberty Community Food Pantry, the River Community Church Food Pantry, which is on Muscatine Avenue, and other area churches and others also offer opportunities to be involved. So your reflection assignment for this week on the right to adequate nutrition is a 300 to 400 written reflection or a 5-minute recorded video uploaded to Icon, and it should address these prompts. First of all, were you surprised by the global scale of the challenges surrounding children and access to adequate nutrition? If so, what surprised you the most? As with many issues of childhood, we tend to blame parents when children lack access to adequate food. Is it reasonable to blame parents, or are there other causes to blame? If adequate food is primarily a parent's responsibility, what might be done to better empower parents to achieve access to adequate food? And if other causes are to blame, what are some things that are some of the bigger causes, and what might be done to address those other causes? Why is it important to use the socio-ecological model to consider causes and strategies for addressing access to adequate nutrition? As one of the wealthiest countries in the world, does the U.S. have a responsibility to contribute to international food aid programs? If not, why not? And if so, why? Of the strategies for supporting access to adequate food discussed in the video, which one do you think is the most important to pursue right now, and why? And finally, what might be some career or volunteer opportunities to consider related to adequate food, and what career volunteer opportunities might be of interest to you, and why? Thank you for watching. We'll see you in class.